Welcome again, everyone. If you're just joining, this is our 000 Freight for Cities webinar series hosted by WRI, Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. This is our day 4 session, our concluding of our 4-part series. This is our session on urban access and managing the street for people and goods.
Thank you, Travis. Welcome everybody that is joining this session. My name is Rogier van den Berg, or Rogier van den Berg, as they say in the Netherlands. I'm the Urban Development Director of the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. Just to give you a quick overview what the Ross Center actually does, it's the cities program of the World Resources Institute, and we work with cities on making better cities for everyone. And we do that through research and through operations with offices in Brazil, China, Ethiopia, India, Mexico, Turkey, and the United States, and a lot of catalytic engagement in other cities in other countries. I'm really excited about this webinar today, the 4th one of the 000 Freight for Cities series. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, and I just had a pre-chat with them. So I'm, as a moderator, are very interested in hearing what each of them had to say. I'm going to introduce them properly, of course. Just a little bit of framing. So I'm the Urban Development Director under the Cities program, and I've always been super kind of excited and passionate about urban space, the physical structure of cities. And if you look at the brick, it is the building block for the house. If you look at the street, it's actually the building block for the city. And it's super interesting to see. And I think for all the specialists here that are in the panel, urban freight is not something new. But for many cities, it is actually something new that they need to take into their kind of policy and planning considerations. This is what we're going to talk today about. So urban access and managing streets for people and freight. I'm going to introduce the speakers now. Today, the session will start with a kickoff presentation by Dr. Anne Goodchild. Welcome very much to the panel, very much appreciated. Dr. Anne Goodchild leads the University of Washington's academic and research efforts in the area of supply chain, logistics, and freight transportation. She's professor of civil and environmental engineering and serves as founding director of both the Supply Chain Transportation and Logistics Online Master's Degree Program and the Supply Chain Transportation and Logistics Center. The latter, which launched the Urban Freight Lab in 2016 to bring together the public and private sectors to address the challenges of the urban freight system by engaging in innovative research. Welcome, Dr. Anne Goodchild. I will also introduce the other speakers before we kick off with the presentation. Very much welcome to Stacey Hodge. Hi, Stacey. Welcome to the panel. Stacey Hodge is the president and founder of SBI Strategies Incorporated, based in New York City of the US. Ms. Hodge has worked to elevate the importance of urban freight and its intersection with land use, public safety, and economic development as central to city planning and operations. Prior to launching SBI Strategies Incorporated, Ms. Hodge built an urban freight team within the New York City Department of Transportation, a team she led for 10 years as the director of the Office of Freight Mobility. Welcome, Stacey, once more. The next panelist, Ms. Laura McNeil from the DC Department of Transportation. Laura, welcome to the panel. Welcome to this webinar. Laura is the Freight and Urban Delivery Planner at the District Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C., where she manages the Commercial Loading Zone program and develops freight programs to support the district's Vision Zero and sustainability goals. Prior to her work at the Department of Transportation of D.C., Laura worked at the New York City Department of Transportation, where she helped launch New York City's on-street car share program. And with a master's degree in urban planning and 10 years experience working in the transportation field in both private and public sectors, Laura has developed a multifaceted understanding of curb management and urban freight planning. Welcome, Laura. Last but not least, panelist Gigi Wolf from FedEx. Gigi Wolf has over 24 years of engineering operational experience at FedEx Express as a leading expert on delivery and pickup processes. As a project engineer, she had led multiple process improvements from data and information to recipient and shipper experiences. And her leadership as an engineering manager led to the investment and use of GPS across the globe, while also targeting next generation solutions to introduce new services and sustainable experiences. Very much welcome, Gigi. So this was a mouthful of experience. So I think it's time to kick off the webinar. I'm excited. I hope you are excited too. So I want to give the floor to Dr. Anne Goodchild for a kickoff presentation. And afterwards, we will have a set of Q&As with the panel in 3 rounds, but I will explain that later. So the floor is yours, Dr. Anne Goodchild.
Thank you so much. I will just get my slides going here. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, perfect.
So just again, welcome. It's a pleasure to have everybody. I know that all of our time is scarce and valuable, so really appreciate everybody joining this morning. And I hope that I can share some interesting information from what we've been doing at the Supply Chain Transportation and Logistics Center at the University of Washington, out in the northwest corner of the country in Seattle, Washington. I'm going to speak to some of the challenges that motivate our work, particularly with trying to manage both people and freight in the same space. I think for a long time, urban freight has been undervalued, sort of understudied. But that's changed a bit, as reflected by this webinar, and there's sort of more interest in the topic, which is wonderful and I think important. But we're also trying to really push for integration of people and freight, and to make sure that we don't think about these things in isolation, and that we come up with solutions that are going to work holistically for cities, and not, prioritize unnecessarily sort of one aspect of that system. So I have a few photos here. This is actually from New York, not Seattle. But I think it's important to understand sort of what the curb does for freight. And in many dense urban environments, the curb is actually the place, not just where a vehicle needs to stop, but where loading and unloading occurs. And there isn't an alternative for many businesses. There is not an off-street location. And so we have people interacting and working in that space. So when we think about, people and goods, there are people involved in that goods transfer. Those aren't just people, moving in the absence of goods. And, I have concerns about the safety and the work environment that we've provided for this kind of activity. This is another photo from Seattle, and here you can see the interaction between the vehicle and the human who's actually moving goods. This guy has some beer containers, but also the other people who need to use that space. And so there's a lack of, there's insufficient space here, but also sort of a lack of prioritization and clarity around, how those people interact with each other in a safe way. This example is a little more extreme, where often if we provide insufficient space for freight, that infringes on the safety and the space for people. So this driver is using the curb cut at the corner because he has a very heavy wheeled object and he needs to use a curb cut. But the only place that curb cut is provided is the same space that should be provided for safe pedestrian crossing of the street. And so we see interactions between, an insufficient freight provision can impact the safety of other users of this space quite significantly. The top picture is another example of that the load zone is too short, and I think that the ramp hasn't been acknowledged. So now the ramp extends through the pedestrian space and is going to require that pedestrian really, move into the street space to cross the road safely. So we have, many examples, many challenges in this space around sort of efficiency as well as safety. And our solution for that at the University of Washington, I felt like the structures that we have to solve these problems, the existing kind of expertise and research environments were limited. And we needed to create a space where both the public sector, so providers of infrastructure, and the private sector, sort of carriers, people moving goods, people who need goods, came together to work on these problems jointly. And so we created the Urban Freight Lab, which is a partnership jointly funded by cities and private companies. We as the university are the researchers and conveners. It's a living lab where there's an emphasis on physical pilot tests in cities where we collect empirical data, and an emphasis on that, you know, not to the exclusion of theoretical work, but certainly to emphasize that we're not done until we test things on the street. And we include, you know, the ecosystem of urban freight providers, carriers, shippers, technology providers, real estate managers, and freight brokers. And we focus on problems that lie at the nexus of public and private space and control. So we've set about focusing on a couple of key metrics. I think when we talk about urban freight challenges, that's a very large scope of things, and we felt it was important to identify a small number of measurable variables so that we could get a baseline, you know, test solutions and measure improvement. Those are reducing dwell time, so the time that the vehicle's at the curb, and also reducing failed deliveries. You know, there are many, many additional metrics, and I encourage us all to you know, identify those and work on improving those. But these have been the two that have been the focus of our community for the last 4 years. And you know, once we have those problems identified and those metrics identified, we've set about on a sort of portfolio of research that includes measuring infrastructure, so making sure we know what physical assets we have, and we have a way of recording those and sharing those. We've set about measuring activity in that space. I believe that a lot of our ideas about urban freight are based on somewhat anecdotal evidence, and we wanted to make sure that we had robust data to demonstrate how the infrastructure was used, and pilot testing solutions that we feel were good candidates for making improvements. So I just have a couple of slides to show some examples of what we've been able to produce with that. Here's a map of all of the private loading bays in the downtown core of Seattle. So prior to our work, the city did not know which buildings had off-street parking for freight and, you know, what their capacity was. But now we know that the vast majority of buildings in Seattle rely solely on the street. And so when we change the street space, we really create or limit access to that building entirely. We have good data about how the curb is used, and my summary of this slide is just that it's pretty fluid. There's a lot of cars in freight spaces and freight in passenger spaces, and so it's really not functioning according to the signage. And then some of our solutions that we've tested, we have done quite a bit of work in the area of package lockers, as we believe that they are a good candidate for both reducing the dwell times, the amount of time that a truck needs to stop and occupy curb space. And we did a test in one of the largest buildings downtown, the Seattle Municipal Tower. And a driver, you know, originally would have visited, you know, up to 7 different floors in that building making deliveries. We put a locker on the first floor, and now the driver can, you know, visit that one locker. So suffice to say, we reduced the dwell time from an average of 27 minutes to about 5 minutes. So that's a 80% reduction in the time that a vehicle occupies space at the curb in front of the building. You also then improve the utilization of that driver and that vehicle, and so we had very high satisfaction rates on the behalf of the building tenants, who had more certainty about the arrival time and could add, a pickup from the locker quite conveniently into their day. So we are now in the process of installing additional lockers in parts of downtown Seattle. This is an example. We just put this one in last week. So we're very proud of our new bollards and our flat concrete. This is accessible from a parking lot, a public parking lot. So it's outside and accessible from the street. And it's available to any carrier. So UPS or FedEx or Amazon can all deliver to this locker. And we are just about to sort of open it up for package delivery. And it's our hope that this is a convenient location for consumers. Maybe when they're commuting to and from work, they're using transit, and they can use this as a pickup point for their packages from any source. We've also been involved in pilot testing some alternative modes in Seattle. This is a cargo bike that operated in one area of downtown. And we've done a very holistic analysis of reductions in VMT and CO2 from the implementation of this cargo bike. And I'm happy to talk about what we found there. We also have a curb sort of visibility project. So currently in most North American cities, drivers really use their eyeballs to see when the curb is available, right? They don't have visibility until they're right there. And this project is installing sensors in curb spaces and alleyways and providing digital visibility of that curb space to the driver so that they can check it, before they're physically there, potentially reroute, perhaps in the long term, we can anticipate and forecast availability of those parking spots using some more sophisticated, AI and analysis of utilization of that parking space, since we will have good historic data about the usability. So the little picture on the right is just the screen of our current prototype app that shows availability or lack of availability of that curb space parking. So, with the Urban Freight Lab, we believe we have a structure, so a work group and community that includes public and private stakeholders that are able to really provide a more robust understanding of urban freight challenges. And as researchers, we can use that community as well as that community's resources to provide data-driven understandings of urban freight challenges. It's important to us as well to test solutions so that we ensure they're practically viable and sort of sustainable from an economic or infrastructure standpoint, and to work to overcome some of those practical challenges to implementation. I think it's an important step to envision solutions and maybe to test those kind of with simulations and models, but it's also a very important step to make sure we understand what are the market obstacles, what are the practical obstacles to putting logistics infrastructure in place so that we can have more vibrant and more livable communities for everybody. So I hope that was a useful oversight. Please, we publish all of our reports on our website. The link is there. And I welcome any questions in the Q&A period.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anne Goodchild, for this insight in the Urban Freight Lab, and also on these three topics that you touched upon: the data-driven understanding, the solutioning, the testing of solution, and really overcoming implementation barriers. And this is something that we will definitely pick up on in the rounds of Q&A with the other panelists. Thank you very much for for setting the stage, for framing the challenge. As I understand, Travis, who is supporting here on the background, we are moving into an icebreaker before we go to the Q&A. We have our Menti questions coming up. So this is for you, participants, to join. I cannot see the Menti questions yet. They are coming up. So to join this, please go to the address above, ahaslides.com, and please help us. What curb or street management tools has your city used to manage urban freight? Multiple choice: double parking enforcement, permitted commercial loading zones, urban consolidation centers, multi-use/express lane use, parcel lockers or neighborhood pickup zones, off-hour deliveries, or something else. Very much appreciated. Please add to the survey. We're eager to know. Commercial loading zone permits going up. Lockers, neighborhood pickup zones, 7. Well, this is quite interesting. Dr. Goodchild, does it give you some inputs for your research laboratory?
Well, you know, of course, I have all kinds of questions. So tell me more about your commercial load zone permit. Is it dynamic? What's the price? How long can they use it for? How do you define a commercial vehicle? Yes.
So please, to the participants, this is very interesting. Please, to the participants related to this outcome and the questions that you have, don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A. So we see here the winner is commercial loading zone permits. Second, parcel lockers or neighborhood pickup zones, off-hour deliveries, load weight and road restrictions coming in fourth. Interesting. So I'll take a screenshot. Where? Oh, sorry. There was.
Yes, I'm also with Stacy, so sort of it would be interesting to know where those.
Yeah. So maybe for the. So there's a question here. So where are off-hour deliveries done? Where are they done? So in which city, in which place? So the people who responded there maybe can put into the chat box or into the Q&A where the off-hour deliveries are done. There's an interest of the panel here. Okay, so the next question: what urban freight solutions are most exciting for you, or show most potential to transform urban logistics? Maximum 2 choices. Cargo e-bikes, drones, autonomous delivery vehicles or droids, Uberization of freight or load pooling, fully electric vehicle fleets, real-time data going up. This is what we have been discussing, and this is what we have been hearing from the sensors also that Dr. Anne Goodchild was talking about. Drivers that can anticipate areas to load off. Cargo e-bikes, very interesting to see. Give it a bit more time. Any question, clarification question from the panel to the participants that they can kind of feed into the Q&A? Are you excited by this, surprised by this? Do you want to know some more from the participants? E-cargo bikes, again, where? Very good. Please, participants, if you put in, if you voted the cargo e-bikes, let us know where that's happening. Mexico City, I see coming in. Pilot project popping into Montreal. All right. So we have a winner here, cargo e-bike, second in place, real-time data dynamics, fully electric vehicle fleets. Thank you very much to the participants for participating in this overview. I want to move into the next part of our conversation of this webinar. We are going to discuss with the panel in 3 rounds a couple of key challenges and solutions and ideas. So round 1, we will discuss around trends in urban logistics. Round 2, we would like to discuss on the street and the curb management. And round 3, we will discuss around technology adoption and data. And once more, participants, feel free to put your questions into the Q&A, and we will address them later on. So first, we have a kind of moderated discussion, and in the end of the session, we will address some of the key questions that come out of the chat. My first question is for Gigi from FedEx, Gigi Wolf from FedEx. A lot has been happening in the logistics world, and whether that's the rise of e-commerce, home and just-in-time deliveries, which has no doubt been impacted by the pandemic. To start us off, could you paint a picture of what's been changing in logistics and where are things are going and how is it impacting deliveries in the urban space? Gigi, please, the floor is yours. And you need to unmute yourself. This is the classic. Yes, all right, thank you. Thank you very much. Welcome to the panel, Gigi.
Thank you. Yes, volumes have changed greatly. From the 80s when we were continuing to grow, a high percentage of our shipments that we were handling were on the business commercial end. And now significantly they've changed and it's highly residential, which is a very different model. So highly residential means you go to houses everywhere, and sometimes it's difficult to find an address. I'm bringing up the point since this is Worldwide Resource Institute. Address information is hard to find. Good, accurate address information is ridiculously hard to find across the globe. And I say that because FedEx can do this because we have humans that work on the ground in every country that know where an address is and can locate it. So since recently we rolled out GPS, we can at least start to use our own information to help our systems do better. But I bring that up just as a point because to find all these residential locations across the globe can be challenging. Luckily, we have a tenured workforce, so we can do it rather well. And it's not a problem for us, but it could be down the road for anyone down the road. But the other item is the recipient. In the shipper recipient relationship, the shippers always have the decisions on the packages, how it flows, what it costs, any additional services it needs. But now we have recipients saying what they want, how they want it. And that's an interesting conundrum from FedEx because we serve both customers. They're both important. And so we're working right now to kind of create a better bridge between the shippers and their customers. Many have those bridges, but giving us visibility. So when a recipient says, I don't want you to leave it on my doorstep, I want you to redirect it to this FedEx office location, and the shipper says, no, you're not allowed to redirect that package. We have a way. So that's been interesting. And that's come about mainly because of the residential volumes we see today. And then last but not least, residential, many customers aren't home. You know, typically, not always, but typically when we go to make a delivery at a commercial address, someone's there. You're usually operating. Or they tell us when they're closed and we know that, but we don't have that luxury with residential. So our policy in the US is we can release the package on the doorstep. And that sounds great, but in the world today, porch piracy is on the rise. It's not very secure. So I was happy to see Ann's identification of lock boxes because that's a very safe delivery. And it's very efficient because then all your packages go to one location and you're not driving and making multiple deliveries or walking within an apartment building. So just a few thoughts.
Thank you very much, Gigi. This is very practical experience, but you extrapolate it as a large challenge that you with FedEx are looking at and trying to resolve. Thanks for that. I want to move before we start connecting the dots. Let us first have a round. I want to move to Laura and Stacy. So Laura first. Both of you have geographic experience being planners from New York City and Washington, D.C. And we see the way that shipping and receiving of goods is shifting, especially with COVID-19, as Gigi already kind of pointed out. So what impacts are you seeing on the city street, and what challenges are arising in the space of that city street? Please, maybe Laura, you can give it a head start.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna use pictures to help describe those challenges. I'm gonna start off with just a picture of enforcement. There's been an arrangement, a long-standing arrangement between users of the curb and municipalities managing the curb. And it's usually been based around longer term storage of vehicle needs. When you go to park, traditionally, you went to park for at least an hour, maybe an hour, or all day. And the expectation was that you would pay for that through coins at first and a credit card and a meter. And now you have the option of fiddling on your phone to pay for that. And to sort of back that up and really kind of compliance, the whole system of enforcement officers were organized around patrols and beats to try to, encourage that compliance and that payment mechanism. And the organization was, at least an hour to try and get around those several city blocks and the number of, the number of blocks each officer could really effectively patrol in a given shift. But these days, that isn't, let's see if I can shift to the next, here we go. That's not the case as much anymore. In addition to longer term storage needs, we have a lot of quicker touches to the curb. These express deliveries like Amazon Prime and day of deliveries, and commercial vehicles that are no longer the same traditional shapes as trucks, but often minivans and smaller vehicles. And I think the picture that I'm enjoying most is that with the top left right there, which you have a Via, which is essentially a commercial car, a commercial use in a passenger car, straddled between a passenger vehicle metered parking zone and a commercial vehicle loading zone. It's that straddling between those traditional regulatory and operational frameworks that's really challenging that traditional system of curbside management and curbside enforcement. And then in addition to those expanding problems, you still have the traditional space constraints that Dr. Goodchild spoke to. The trucks in bike lanes, trucks in bus lanes, trucks in bus stops, parked in the median, and all those safety and sightlined and congestion and emissions consequences for that mismatch between space and need. Those are some of the fundamental challenges that are really, I find that cities are needing to confront and really discussing these days.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I introduced you in the beginning, but I see some participants joined later. So this was Laura McNeil from the DC Department of Transportation. Thanks for laying out this mismatch. Stacy Hodge from SBI Strategies. Can you shed some light on this question? So what impacts are you seeing on the city street? And please, unmute.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Anne said and everything Laura has said. We have an issue with compliance and enforcement and better planning, not planning as silos, but planning together. So when I worked at the city DOT, we have staff who might be working on plazas, staff who's working on the bike lanes. We cannot work in silos. We really need to be working collaboratively, because that's when we have issues. Also, if your city is using parking tickets from truckers as revenue source, now you have a conflict. You see, so I visited London and saw how they were using technology to manage their curb access, and they had great compliance. And you can use that revenue to then go and help fund the way they do their public officials who are doing that work. I think that is an area we still need to work on here in the USA, because we are not using technology enforcement for curb management, but we do use technology for speeding tickets and some other things. So we need to try to get a handle on that, because we're not going to be able to manage this space the way we have been doing. So I have a few pictures here, but everything Laura just showed you, you'll see the same thing in New York. This corridor here that I'm showing in this slide, the Business Improvement District asks DOT to come and help them put in some loading zones, because there's only one lane in each direction. And the moment someone double parks, everything on the corridor breaks down. And so now I can't advance this slide for some reason. Okay, here we go. So there's a bus. If we want people to use transit, we need to make sure they can get from A to B in a reasonable time. And with the double parking on this particular corridor, the transit was very slow. And so this project was done in 2011. We went in and put in some loading zones, and I went to look at it last week, and it's still not working very well. The moment, the period of time here is when the loading zones had already expired. So the moment those expired, things seem to have just broken down again. So we used time-lapse cameras back in 2011. We have much better technology now to figure out what's going on. We use that information to determine when to put in the loading zone. So these are some of the signs my team and I did back in 2011. Certain sides of the street had needed more time. So this top sign here, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., truck loading only, but you need to have, if there's no one out to make sure that that is an actual truck using that space at that time, you're still gonna have problems. So I really do believe we need to be exploring more innovative ways to do the enforcement. This picture is in Manhattan, similar problem. This community came to me and our group and asked to put in some truck loading for the things that Gigi was talking about, residential package deliveries. A lot more people were getting things delivered to this residential building, which meant double parked trucks, UPS, FedEx, and they wanted us to reduce that for safety. So we put the first 60 feet here for truck loading, and you see who's there, 2 vans and a taxi. There's 2 NYPD tow trucks on this block in this picture. We put up time-lapse cameras to monitor what would happen, but they can't be out there every day, all day to take people out. So we need to really look at camera enforcement, because without it, there's no compliance and our solutions will not work. So going forward, what's going on today? At DOT, we tried to be collaborative. So this is a team within the DOT who wanted to do temporary seating for plazas. So this is back before COVID-19. Now I'm going to show you some things that are making this more relevant today. But back in that era of 2011, we were trying to be innovative. And I supported these programs because I could talk to these restaurants and say, shift your deliveries to the off hour so that the commercial corridor can make a better use of this space during the day. And so this was a complementary program that I could promote when I'm talking to people about off-hour deliveries. Consider putting in one of these temporary plazas along the corridor, seasonal, and then have your deliveries come in the off hour. And they saw great economic benefit to the shops in this area, because if people are attracted to dwell there, they're going to spend money there. And so then you want to build that type of partnership. So what are we seeing now? Now with COVID-19, and it's all over the country and all over the world, where you may not be able to sit inside to eat. The restaurants now have to put their seating outdoors on the sidewalk, which is now impacting the things that Anne talked about, that, you know, we needed the curb to do the unloading because there's no alley behind these buildings typically. The truck is still going to need to make that delivery. So again, look at off-hour deliveries. If you brought in the goods earlier, then there would be no conflict now when we really are more pressed to share this space. So I went around and looked at a few of these, and this is taking these in June. People are really trying to save their businesses and trying to be creative. The city has closed some streets to make it just for walking for this purpose, because people need to be able to use their street space now if we want to keep our businesses. A lot of businesses have been shut down. I interviewed one of our business improvement districts in the Union Square area, which is like Lower Manhattan area, and something like 85%, 50 to 85% of the businesses have closed or have reduced their activity. So these are some of the challenges that we are going to be faced, but we have solutions. We could be looking at off-hour deliveries and more innovation, and we should be looking at better innovations for the enforcement of our curbs. And so that's what I wanted to share. So people are really trying. We want businesses to survive, and there's opportunity here to be collaborative and innovative to make sure we can get our deliveries in and save those jobs as well.
Thank you so much, Stacey, also for this very nice set of pictures. I mean, really looking at, I mean, these dynamics that you find in streets, and also kind of really touching upon all these different users, both public, private, how you enforce, and how kind of you could make use of the different times of the day, how you can create much more business opportunities for the actual businesses using the curbside. Well, so this is very interesting. Also leads us to kind of the next topic that we want to explore a bit more in depth around kind of that street and curb management. And I'm looking now at Laura McNeil from the DC Department of Transportation. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about how DDOT is managing street use and curb access for freight and urban deliveries, and what actually works in a practical manner? We already heard Dr. Ann Goodchild say, you know, some things work on paper, but they don't work in practice. So, so Laura, you are experienced in actually managing the city context and especially this issue. So please.
Great, thank you. I have a fun thing about off-hour deliveries. I have a 24-hour convenience store that's been moving into DC, and they set up shop in a neighborhood in Adams Morgan in DC, which is a center of nightlife. And we were so pleased that this 24-hour convenience store was restocking its location outside of the regular business hours. But problematically, that happened to be the peak hour of nightlife in this particular corridor, when people were at their most flamboyant on the city streets. And so having a tractor trailer pull up and do heavy deliveries and block sight lines turned out to be not a good fit in this particular neighborhood. So I think that's one of the challenges that I'm facing, is making sure that off-hours delivery is context sensitive and really matches the street operations at each particular location. But to back up a little bit, I think that DDOT has been in a good position because it has a legacy commercial loading zone program, over 600 locations around the city, traditionally requested by businesses only when they don't have off-street options, to provide a safe place for those goods to be delivered and really support the businesses. And those are the pictures on the top rung of this slide. And it's a metered system, and drivers can either buy permits. It's a static permit, to answer Dr. Goodchild's question. And there's 2 hours across the city, or there's like a mobile payment option. Now, that has been traditionally a sufficient way of managing commercial deliveries, but as we all know, commercial deliveries are increasing, and what is considered commercial is becoming increasingly difficult to discern. So especially with the advent of ride hail and Lyft and Uber, even Uber Eats, there's been a challenge to try to address these sort of quasi-commercial uses. And so the city developed a pickup and drop-off zone system, which is essentially a no parking with illustrative signage. Here in the bottom row, you can see an orange person approaching a car to get at where curb access was needed to reduce double parking congestion, especially based around taxi and ride hail pickup and drop off activity. We have those, we have that data, And we've been using it to try to address those high activity areas and bring people to the curb safely. So that has been, I think, a baseline of great success. An additional success that DDOT's been is integrating curb access with shared mobility and micromobility. Our shared and micromobility programs have permit conditions that require data sharing agreements, which is incredibly helpful for figuring out where trips end and begin to locate parking facilities off street or in the street when the sidewalk is too narrow, and to manage the criteria where those infrastructure or facilities can be located to complement the needs of delivery vehicles instead of directly conflicting with them. And so that integration of curb access with those access programs or mobility programs, I think, is another success. But these successes also come with their own challenges. Circling back again to that enforcement system, these quick touches when these pick up and drop off activities that happen, they're so quick. They're 2 minutes at a time. The act of payment is as much as the actual action of reaching the curb, and so it becomes a huge logistical hurdle to expect drivers to pay for that. Those micromobility vehicles sometimes block access to what we have down here is a red top meter, which is a dedicated ADA accessibility parking space. So managing those vehicles. And then those pickup and drop off zones, as they are regulated currently, no parking, that meter revenue loss is a big deal. And it is something that's, I think, especially challenging in these times. And lastly, well, no, actually not lastly, second to last, on that bottom right-hand corner it's a picture which might be difficult to discern from afar, but it's of an off-street loading dock where the building gates are open for that loading dock, and yet the barriers, the security barriers, are still up. This is a common occurrence in this particular location, but it's illustrative of off-street options that are not being effectively used, and therefore what should be moved off-street is taking place on-street, and that's a common challenge that I'm seeing in cities across the United States, is that there are off-street options and yet they're not as convenient, or they're not being managed effectively or efficiently to really address those loading needs. And lastly, there's a challenge of trying to provide curbside flexibility of use by time of day or by type of user. And that is a great way of trying to smartly, effectively manage limited space, and yet communicating that clearly and efficiently is quite difficult. So that center sign is what the DDOT conundrum, how to communicate the different uses of the same location to different users in a way that can be actually effectively understood and complied with. So those are some of the successes and the challenges that I see on city streets, especially in DC.
Thank you, Laura. That middle picture is absolutely excellent. I mean, it tells the reality. It tells also the complexity of how do you organize, maintain that in a proper manner. Thank you very much for this intervention. Gigi, I had a question for you too. So how does FedEx bring in kind of the innovation and efficiency and sustainability to its urban and last mile operations, and especially in relation to the street and the curb use, as we just saw in a lot of good illustrations of Laura. And you're muted, by the way, so please.
Thank you. All right, yeah, I'm gonna share, I don't have a high-tech sharing of our tools. I'm gonna share with you our best practices. These work today in the US and they work across the globe. And interestingly enough, many of which I learned when I worked in Manhattan as an operations engineer in Manhattan. So I thought it was interesting that we all have touched Manhattan somewhere, but these are happening across the globe. So let me show you, share a few slides. All right. let me take you to my first slide. Okay, so everybody, are you seeing a slide? Okay. So everyone has touched base on this in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to introduce this in a different means. So in Manhattan, space is a premium. Property is significantly expensive. And so FedEx has a team of foot couriers. We call them foot couriers, but they don't walk their way all over the city. We shuttle them to a location. Some park in a location. We park a vehicle once, we leave it there for the day. That courier then returns to the building on a subway, and the next courier works out of the same vehicle parked in the same location for the rest of the day. So we use a vehicle once, we park it all day, and then we bring it back. We found that to work very well in our very dense areas. So Empire State Building, we have 3 couriers that just work there all day. There's enough work to keep you working. The only reason you have a vehicle out there is you need somewhere to take packages out of or put packages into. So we have also suited couriers where we'll take out a team of foot couriers. They'll have a very secure cart, and I say secure, it locks unto itself. So you can push it to a street corner out of the way of people, and you can work out of that cart. And then you can move it to the next corner that you need to work out of and work out of that cart. And then someone will come to pick you up at a meet point. It's worked very well. We do this in Hong Kong. We do this in Singapore. It reduces the vehicle, no vehicle. But it works very well. And quite frankly, from a company standpoint, those couriers are most efficient. And that's just because it's very, very dense. So just, again, some best practices. And I'm going to give you the flip side. I know we're talking about urban environments, but we have to deliver in very rural environments as well. And I bring this up because what happens, interestingly enough, not on FedEx's account, but on our customer's account, customer being the recipient, is our recipients have all their packages delivered to a mom and pop location in town. Recipients in urban US and other urban areas, they go into the town once a day. They don't want couriers coming out on the farm and they're in the middle of working and interrupting their day with packages. And they don't really want them on their porch and leaving packages on the porch. Take them to this location. I get my mail, I get my UPS packages, I get my milk and my bread and my FedEx packages, and I'm done for the day. If that were happening across more locations, it just reduces fuel, reduces vehicle travel, and also creates a better situation. If those customers are going to come into town anyways, let them get all their packages, let them get all their goods in one location. Just a thought to think about. We've talked quite a bit about curbside transactions. I don't think I have to say too much more on that, but absolutely. I tell you what, we have many locations where we back in a tractor trailer into a dock, and that's just the practice, but that requires more time, more skill in terms of the driver, and it burns more fuel. So curbside is certainly what we'd like to do more of. It's, again, where our recipients will allow us to do that, or where our shippers will allow us to do that. So we're at the beck and call of our shippers. I was tickled to see lockers brought up because these have been popping up all over the globe. And we have very, very smart vendors who've made them able to be used by any customer and any service provider. Just smart, very smart. So this is an example where we saw it pop up when we started GPS a while back, and we're making deliveries here. We went, oh, we're delivering on the street. What's going on? What happened? You know, this is where the delivery should have happened. Well, this gated community does not allow couriers or any service provider coming in, but we can deliver them all in this lockbox. Wow, that reduces travel for us. That centralizes all our packages into one location. We love it, technically, and they're safe here. They're locked up, and only this recipient can get their package from that box. So we found it to be very, very efficient and somewhat game-changing. So they're all over the globe these days, but they're not everywhere. So let me just show you an example. This is Midtown Memphis. This is an area where I live. And if you can see, you see all the rooftops. And on a daily basis, US Mail is going to every rooftop. Whether they have packages and documents you want or not, they're going there, right? You're going to see FedEx going up and down these streets. You're going to see UPS, Amazon. We're all making deliveries. Well, it's unfortunate because these are streets, ideally, you'd want kids to be out playing on, but they're busy. This day and age, they're busy. They're different than when I grew up. But of course, I grew up in rural America. But let's say instead, just as an idea and a solution, we had block boxes on these, and I call it a major artery. These are not huge streets, but for that neighborhood, these are arteries. Where these are more the residential, you might have a business here. Here's Echo. This is a nice restaurant. This is another nice little restaurant. Here's an AutoZone, parts. But you could have lock boxes. Now, this would require residents to drive by and get their packages, but one, they would be safe, they'd be secure, reduce porch piracy. As I've told my organization, to reduce it, we just don't release packages. But you know, customers like their packages there when they get home, but they really don't like it when they were there and they're gone. So again, ideas.
Gigi, can you move? We gently need to go to the next question. So please wrap it up.
Well, actually, that's my last slide, just to check. Just an idea. So again, it's let's eliminate the number of vehicles. Number one, we're even trying to do that internally. Number one, let's deliver less to every address. We've kind of created a culture of consumption, right? You're going to have every delivery service provider deliver every package to your doorstep every day. Let's consolidate and centralize it. And I say this from a FedEx person, but I mean, gosh, it just makes sense to me from a city perspective. You know, stop all these packages. Now big shipments might have to go right to the person, but I'm talking about all these residential packages. Thank you.
Thank you, Gigi. That was a very passionate plea for a more centralized approach. Thank you very much. And thank you also for pointing out how you experience even as a consumer and where you live. So thank you. No, but it's a very vivid, I think a very vivid explanation on the complexity on one hand, but also somehow the solution in itself is not too difficult. Probably to operationalize it is a tricky thing. This is also what Dr. Goodchild showed us in the beginning. Let us further. We are moving forward with some next interventions. First, I want to ask Dr. Goodchild, and then afterwards Stacy, on your advice to cities and businesses that want together to build more of this participatory, co-beneficial freight solutions, because we have already seen in the discussion in the intervention this public, private, the different actors. How do you bring them together? And what are some of the examples from your work? Mm-hmm. Please, Dr. Goodchild.
Yeah, thank you. I clearly think that engagement is really essential. And I think that for us has been based on trust. So I hear a lot, you know, cities and maybe researchers sort of ask me, you know, how did you get them to give you their data, you know, and it'll usually be in terms like that, sort of get them, you know, to give you stuff. And I think that's the wrong way to look at this problem. It's sort of like, you know, I had a student, you know, and if you have to move and you want a friend because your friend would help you when you have to move. And I said, well, you know, what you want is a friend. And then when you have to move, maybe that friend will help you. So I think, you know, we really have to build long-term mechanisms whose initial priority is understanding. And, you know, I recommend that be based on data. And because those relationships are the foundation of understanding each other, trusting each other, being willing to take risks, being willing to share, being willing to try things together. And that may sound slow, and that may, and it may not allow you to be entirely self-serving. So I think both cities and private companies who use this space need to recognize that it is a shared space and there's going to be some give and take. And so, you know, that's again what a relationship or what a friendship really looks like. So I say those words, but I don't find that everybody really hears them. And as cities, you know, we really can't just think about, you know, making other people do what we want. I don't think that's a pathway to cooperation. So my recommendation is that cooperation is the best way, and that comes from, you know, really trying to understand each other and with information and you know, setting clear priorities and having transparent decision making. And you know, considering that it is a community and we want to work together. I think the other important thing to point out is that we have to collectively think that residents of the city are a really important constituent, and you know, they're not explicitly part of the Urban Freight Lab, but when we talk about, you know, what do we want our cities to look like, those voices are, you know, essential and important. So we can create the cities we want, I think, collectively, and you know, but we have to have clarity on what we want the city to look like and what we want that space to feel like and how we want that space to be prioritized and used. And we should create our own vision and then, you know, figure out how to make that happen.
Wow, thank you so much for a very rich reflection on how to collaborate, and also on the overlapping interest and competition in that space that is the street and the curbside. Stacy, for you, do you have some examples from your work on this participatory co-beneficial approaches to urban freight?
Well, first I want to say everything Anne just said, I agree with. Unfortunately, some of us work with people who don't have that philosophy. So I had that philosophy. I took the 10 years to build relationship and to do things with respect. She mentioned trust. She mentioned get them to give you stuff. Well, there's some folks in city government or in public agencies who think that because they have the power, they get to say what happens. So you're going to have to identify, if any of you on this, you know, conference find out who the right allies are, because you're going to have to make sure that the people you bring to the table can treat the urban freight industry with respect. They are not the villains. Sometimes people come to a meeting and they will treat the urban freight persons like the villain. So let's start by that. So the first phase is, do you agree with how Anne has framed it? And if there's people who don't see it that way, you're going to need to get on the same page. Because the first thing I did when I was given the opportunity to build the freight office, I was given an opportunity to have a truck summit. It wasn't my idea, but I used it to shape what would happen. So there were some people who wanted to come because they want to use the hammer. But it was a way to find out from industry, what are your concerns? And then we're going to share our concerns from the regulatory side. And once we get all of that together, we will see what can be some short-term projects we can do. So that's one example. We had a truck summit. You could have some type of other summit, but the point is bring the people together, but have respect. Make sure there's leadership from the agency side, leadership from the industry side. And we took many, many months to prepare this, to figure out which topics we were going to talk about. What are the regulatory constraints you're facing for operating in our city? And on our side, what are the issues we see coming from industry? And then we had facilitators to help us work through that. And from that, then I had my policy direction for the next 10 years as to what programs and regulations I was going to try to get data on and then try to address. But you have to have respect. You cannot think that just because you have power, you're going to make people do what you want. That's a fail start. And so some of the things we were able to accomplish over those 10 years was improving access to the airport for larger trucks, because some folks decided we just don't want big trucks and we're just not going to happen. So it took us several years, and collaborating with other agencies to help us with the data and the planning, but we were able to study large trucks going to the airport and change the city rule that prohibited 53-foot trailers to go to JFK Airport to the cargo center. And so, you know, that's how we did a number of different things, but it takes time. So as Ann said, it's not gonna be, some of this stuff has to be organic. You have to be honest and trustworthy and build that trust. And that's what we did when I was in that role for 10 years. And I would have to defend the industry because there's always someone showing up who wants to treat industry like the villain. And we can't have that.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
can
much.
Can I
oh,
give
yes.
another example, Roger? So, yeah,
Yeah,
so,
briefly,
and
yes.
Stacy is really a pillar of someone who started thinking about freight at a city level before. I can't identify anyone I knew before that. One of the other things I hear, you know, from the public sector is sort of this sense that carriers are driving around trucks all the time or freight vehicles, you know, that don't have anything in them. And, you know, isn't that ridiculous? And can't we fix that problem for them? And I think that kind of lack of understanding, prevents good solution, finding good solutions. So, you know, carriers drive around trucks they don't want to drive around partly full or with limited cargo. They're profit driven, they're very sophisticated, you know, have immense data and planning tools, but they do that because of customer demands and, you know, the requirements of their business. So, you know, that kind of sort of judgment and believe, you know, it's a little bit of an arrogance that believing as an outsider, you understand and can solve some industry's problem for them, is really counterproductive.
So it's, I mean, thank you very much. But it also relates very much to a topic that we discussed and touched upon on the data. Actually, Stacy said, you know, you have the leadership of the agency, you have the leadership of the industry that gives me policy direction, but I need the data. So, so how do you do that matchmaking? How do you, let's say, what are the key tools that we have at hand now to kind of to mainstream that and to innovate in that space? And the next block of short intervention, I want to see if we can further ideas around this kind of technology adoption and data a bit, partially also to resolve this matchmaking challenge that is there. And customers that want their packages, but they don't want the urban freight. Huh? This is kind of the conundrum. So, I know it. I've been an urban dweller for all my life, so I complain too. Laura, can you shed some light? I mean, about this complaint about, you know, but this is more from the industry perspective, a complaint in the freight management world that there's not enough data on freight and commodities. And what is the role of data in DC's freight management strategy and what's missing?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to first by taking a nod to Dr. Goodchild's work with sensors and sort of pioneering some of those pilot programs to find out what is operationally most effective and efficient for getting for data on freight trips. I'm frankly jealous of cities, city programs that have access to data, like all of our micromobility and shared mobility programs have permit conditions that require data. So they have the data sources to better manage where they place their infrastructure and manage the programs themselves. And in DC as well, through you know, its regulatory system has access to ride-hail data to help manage where pickup and drop-off zones should be located. Unfortunately, that same framework is not in place for freight. So it's on us as the city to invest the resources to make those observations and get the data to better understand where freight trips are happening, which vehicles, how long they're staying, what the purpose of those trips are, and how they integrate in the existing infrastructure or loading zones in the city. And so, you know, as startups are coming into the market with camera technology and sensor technology, DDOT's using this as an opportunity to create partnerships with both academic partners and some of these private companies. So recently, DDOT took advantage of an opportunity to collaborate with a startup called CurbFlow. This was last summer, where we set up research zones, 9 curbside locations based around where high activity for DoorDash or app-based deliveries or on-demand deliveries, the acronym changes by the week, but Uber Eats, say. So these locations, curbside, were cited based around these high activity zones. There was an ambassador, a staff on site, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., registering vehicles and logging who was using the curb and for how long. And that gave us a lot of insight into how these curbside locations were being used, and how street management improved as a result. So I'm just going to share some of the data that we learned. Perhaps unsurprisingly, we learned that those app-based delivery vehicles were the biggest users of those zones, which makes sense since they were based around those high activity, heat map zones. But we also learned ride-hail data, ride-hail vehicles and freight vehicles and parcel delivery vehicles also took advantage of those reliable access to the curb. And even more interesting to me was getting a better sense of which vehicle types and which types of trips were staying at the curb for how long. And so this chart breaks out freight, municipal, which could have been a cop car or a DC vehicle, those on-demand deliveries or Uber Eats, parcel delivery, and ride-hail. And this was really insightful to us. Now, it wasn't a cross-section of all loading zones across the city, but this really helped illustrate that traditional truck unloading freight wasn't taking that 2-hour limit that we have currently allotted in our loading zones. It was taking between 8 and 12 minutes. And those on-demand deliveries, those Uber Eats, they weren't quick touches at the curb as we originally conceived of them being. They were, again, about 7 to 10 minutes long. That's short-term parking, while the ride-hail and taxis were, approximately 2 minutes. And those parcel deliveries in those locations also weren't taking, hours at a time. They were taking between, 9 and 11 minutes. So that insight into which users are using each location and for how long has some profound implications for how we can readjust the frameworks and programs for curb management. In addition, this research collaboration helped paint a picture of somewhat competing uses, but often complementary uses. So this chart illustrates how parcel delivery and freight delivery, perhaps again, unsurprisingly, is concentrated in the morning to early afternoon periods, where those Uber Eats drivers are really kicking in at around 11 and extending beyond traditional curbside loading frameworks, at least in the district, extending beyond 6:30 up into 8 or 9 p.m. So the understanding of the commercial uses of the curb in terms of time frame, that sort of granular information is really helpful, and that some of these uses are complementary, not always conflicting. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight the opportunity to partner with academic institutions who are doing some analysis of their own, like RPI in this, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute has been doing analysis looking at business information and assessing what trips, deliveries, and even service vehicles like plumbers and HVAC systems, which businesses generate which types of trips, and concentrating that in the most commercial zip codes. What does that look like in terms of street impacts? And what I find really interesting in this this analysis that I was just, flipping through was that DC is an outlier in that it has a lot of service trip generation based on those business types. So this is an opportunity to develop a pilot and really verify whether this analysis and these estimates are seen on the ground, and what types of programmatic or policy adjustments we can make to better manage. Because if those plumbers and those trucks are using the same zones and the plumbers are there for 2 to 4 hours or more at a time, those trucks aren't going to get that access to the curb, and double parking and congestion results. So getting that granular information through partnerships, I think, is going to be a tremendously helpful way to inform our next steps as a city.
Thank you so much. This was really the granular data that can really inform your kind of policy and decisions. Thank you very much for shedding a light on that. We are lagging behind in time, and I really want to address some of the questions of the participants, of course. So let us kind of wrap up with 2 questions. The first one to Gigi and Anna. So please keep your responses to a minimum. A bit, we have talked about already about the lock boxes and the parcel lockers, but what are other kind of more futuristic solutions that could really change the landscape of urban freight in the cities? We hear about drones and automatic delivery robots. Can you give us a kind of a look into the future, and please once more keep your, because this can be a topic in itself, but please shed some light on that. Gigi, the floor is yours.
I know we're studying drone technology as well as robots. Now, me personally, I think there's a big distance to go before that can happen. So think about a drone flying in Manhattan, flying in Hong Kong. Is that going to be safe from a security standpoint? Is that safe? How's it going to get into a building? Who's going to let it in? There's a lot of challenges. And I think really, quite frankly, from this conversation, one area I think that's very clear is to do anything greater than current, we've got to collaborate, cities as well as providers, on solutions. Because as example, if a drone could make deliveries efficiently and effectively, let's just say, it's got to be able to get to the consumer. Now, a drone delivering to lock boxes might make sense. It might seem a little safer too than a drone being outside your door of an apartment building. So I think those solutions have to be created in a collaborative environment. I don't think they can happen FedEx creating a drone and a city saying we want drones. I think it's got to happen collectively. And I think if we want to reduce vehicle emissions, that could be done collectively too. And I'm going to throw out this idea on that note. Cities, take ownership of your deliveries. Have all your packages consolidated. Have your own process and couriers making all the deliveries. Because there's no reason you need FedEx, USPS, Amazon, and all these other providers there. And then when you have the on-demand services, maybe those get consolidated too. I don't know within a neighborhood, but I think we've got to think differently if we really want to make our impact on the world. And I say that not as a FedEx employee, because that puts us out of business. But maybe we're not the first and last mile anymore, right? Maybe cities take ownership of it. And that way you consolidate yourselves and you fit what meets your city. Thanks.
This is a perfect piece for on the wall. Take ownership of your degree. So thank you very much. I mean, and Stacy, maybe, or sorry, Anne, I wanted to ask you this question too about this new futures. And maybe there are some in the chat there, and in the Q&A, there are some questions related to e-bikes and e-scooters and adoption in the city. Maybe you can shed some light on that too.
Yeah, I think I agree a lot with Gigi. I don't think our problems are going to be solved by singular or novel technologies. I think our challenges will be solved by sort of communities and community planning. And I think we have the technologies we need to have very low impact solutions now. And the question is sort of how we organize that and how we implement them. I think bikes, and human power are certainly part of that, especially at the very last, part of the delivery. Walking, if it's to a locker or if it's from a truck, is a very low cost, currently available, practical solution that we should be using in cities. I also agree with Laura mentioned really utilizing off-street parking and off-street facilities. I don't think we should focus entirely on the street space for pickup and drop off, and that we need to be more creative about how we take advantage of and how we utilize, how we make available off-street space. And cities with alleys, that's particularly true. That's really underutilized space that we should be using for goods and services. And I think electrification is what, certainly when we think about emissions, and especially here in the Northwest, where all of our power comes generally essentially from hydro, is part of a low impact solution. And generally, at this point, that's probably fairly small, more nimble vehicles that can be used in cities.
Thanks a lot. And maybe addressing already, touch upon briefly on a question that was in the Q&A, and I don't know if you were willing to take it, but I mean, then if you look into what would be a key or a core investment, or let's say a top investment for kind of supporting this a more sustainable freight ecosystem in the city.
Yeah.
Could you, yeah.
So as a first step, and I think Stacy said this, cities need to believe that urban logistics is part of their jurisdiction. Cities need to believe that. They need to invest in understanding it. We can't understand it if we don't collect data. And cities have accepted that they need to collect data to understand transit and people's movements and transportation. They have not accepted that they need to spend money, be that on technology or surveys, to understand urban freight. And we can't do a whole lot without that. So cities need to believe that this is part of how they provide healthy living cities. They need to invest in, as limited as we can. We want to be efficient, but it costs some money, takes some resources to understand this system. And then they need to also believe that investing in some targeted spot infrastructure is part of what a great city does. It has urban logistics infrastructure, and it uses that infrastructure to make their city a more vibrant place for everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Goodchild. So we are kind of mixing a little bit of the questions into to some other topics that we wanted to touch upon. And Stacy, we want to tap into a little bit of your experience. I mean, we are discussing about urban freight, and audiences and cities we work in, they understand that urban freight is important. But their office may not have the capacity, or resources or interest to really engage in this issue. And I mean, if we discuss now that cities need to take this seriously, and they need to act on it and take a kind of a leadership role. I mean, you have been involved in building up the Office of Freight Mobility at the New York City Department of Transportation. And now you're leading your own consulting practice, and you grew that practice in New York City. Can you give some advice? I mean, if we really think that we can create the cities we want, as been mentioned in this discussion, and we want to take urban freight seriously, what needs to be done? What is your advice to cities?
Okay, so I would say that I was lucky that the people who preceded me did a study on freight for the city of New York, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was to create this Office of Freight Mobility. So I didn't plant the seed, someone else planted that seed. And so what I'm going to suggest, I've seen in the past few years, a few cities have added their own city DOT. So in New York State, we have a state DOT and we have a city DOT, because our city is like 8 million people. So if we have figured out in some of these other places like Atlanta and Oakland that they needed to create a city DOT, we need to then look at the structure of the org chart. There needs to be someone at a high level in the decision-making suite who has the freight portfolio. The freight portfolio cannot be so low down the org chart. Okay, because if we understand that our economy and jobs are tied to freight, then we need to put that as a priority high up in the org chart, and to be collaborative, not siloed. If we're doing planning for the city, that means we're looking at bikes, buses, we're looking at safety, we need to be looking at freight. You cannot ignore one of the biggest users of the street network. You know, so when I came into the city in 2007 at the agency, they created assistant commissioners focused on public art, plazas, but freight was not among them. So if you're going to make change and you are starting to see how to envision this, you need to have all of the stakeholders who have a big part of a city at the proper level within the organization. That's the start.
Thank you so much. I mean, this all comes together so well. I mean, we are close to ending this conversation, but we want to give a couple of more minutes, so we go over slightly, because I want to address a couple of questions in the Q&A. Stacey, you talk about the top level engagement, support, leadership that is needed. But as Hugo in the question and answer asks, actually the receivers, what is their role in this whole curbside management and the delivery process? And there is also another part of the Q&A. Somebody asks, I mean, you know, delivery at other hours than you know, a different type of hours. So what is, I mean, is there how do you look at the receivers as part of that ecosystem and to improve actually freight logistics in cities? So I don't know, maybe Gigi, you can kick it off, maybe a short response to that, the role of receivers in this ecosystem. Sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. I mentioned that earlier, that recipients have more to say about when to receive packages, and companies like FedEx, and I'd say for certain it's not just FedEx, we are working to be more nimble to meet our recipient needs, because it's not only about making service, is what we'd say, it's about the customer experience. And if we can get there at a time when the customer's going to be there, we can get a signature, it's a win for us. And so even right now, we're creating some new technologies to allow us, and I say allow us because our current technologies and our current best practices weren't, to make deliveries later, because some recipients want them later. So we're really working to customize solutions for our recipients as well as our shippers.
Thanks,
Roger,
Gigi.
if I can
Yeah.
add something to that,
Yes.
if us with the Urban Freight Lab, one of our learnings and that we've adapted to has really been how important the receiver is in this ecosystem. And really, we can't function without them being part of this conversation. So the Building Owners and Managers Association has been a member of the Urban Freight Lab, and also Terreno Realty, who focuses on logistics real estate. I mean, they provide the anchors and the demand, and how they manage buildings, especially very large buildings, how those are managed and run, dictates when vehicles and how vehicles arrive and behave. So they're absolutely an essential. And I don't, for us, that's been something that we've understood through our work, but I think we all need to know that that's a really key element, and that we can encourage them to operate buildings differently for, with off hours, for example. And when we do that, we're going to shift and change what we see on the street.
Thank you. This touches upon quite a couple of questions around the receiver in the ecosystem. Thanks a lot. Another question that pops up is around the economics. Around is there a fear that with the growing use of fully autonomous drones, droids? I heard some skepticism here, but with kind of new automation, that will that impact, let's say, the job market? Who is willing to touch upon that question? Yes, Gigi, please unmute. No problem.
No, I think personally, we are ways away from any robotic drone only delivery. I think what you could see is a courier outside on a street corner delivering packages with a drone, but again, that's far away. it takes the right technology. I mean, think of the packages we deliver and the packages where they have to go. How do you ring a doorbell? I don't know, with a drone. Do you just leave it? And how do you know where you're going to leave it? So I think, one, we don't have the technology. Two, there's so much to making a good delivery that people don't quite understand. The terrain, the experience, and quite frankly, people are afraid of drones. They're also afraid to answer the door anymore these days. I'll just be very honest. Living in urban Memphis, it's unusual to have your doorbell ring midday. And if it looks like a courier, the big question is it a courier? So I'm kind of willing to think, you know, we got to go towards lock boxes and other methods, because many times customers aren't home and many times they don't want to answer the door or they can't get to the door in time. And so having it located somewhere where they can get to a package and it's safe is maybe a better experience in this world today.
Thank you so much. We're over time. And I could conclude, and I could do that for quite a bit of time, because it has been a really rich discussion. I'm not going to do a whole wrap up, but we touched upon on real leadership issues. Cities have a role to play, but also on the other end of the spectrum, the beneficiaries or the recipients. We touched upon data on the physical space, and we touched upon the whole ecosystem. I found it a very interesting discussion, absolutely a discussion that we need to further, something that cities need to understand better. Lara, you gave very excellent solutions and policy directions and thoughts for how cities actually deal with kind of practical issues. So I want to thank the panel. Of course, I want to thank the participants. Thanks for attending this webinar of the World Resources Institute. I want to thank Dr. Ann Goodchild from the University of Washington. I want to thank Stacy Hodge from SBI Strategies. I want to thank Laura McNeil from the DC Department of Transportation. I want to thank Gigi Wolf from FedEx. You're all very passionate. I hope more city leaders will be passionate. I hope more industries will be as passionate as you are. Thank you so much, Travis. Travis is behind the screen, managing everything, has brought this fantastic panel together and have discussed and prepared this webinar. So this is the last webinar in the 000 Freight for Cities, the webinar series by the WRI Ross Center for Cities. Thank you very much. Thank you for the participants. Hope to see you again in any other webinar that we broadcast. And stay safe and, well, watch the road.